So welcome back to Don't Look Up, where we ask you to look up. We go through cutting edge science. We go through topics that you really care about. And if you like these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe below so you never miss one. And comment below, please. We also love reading all of the comments. And today, I have a very special guest with me, Jodi Duval, all the way from Perth, Australia, to talk about the mind-gut mood connection.
Favorite topic. So happy to be here, Scott.
I'm so happy to have you. So you have a clinical practice in Perth.
I do.
I have a clinical practice here just outside of Boulder. And this is something we see a lot. What are you seeing as the problem? I mean, in the sense that we have so many different things that are happening in our body all the time. And so many of us are dealing with depressed mood and just anxiety and just having a hard time. How do you see modern society contributing to our mood? And how is this related to the gut as far as you can tell?
So zoom out first. The most common thing I find myself telling my clients is that you are not living by the laws that it is required to be a human being. Basic, simple. And that means we don't get the sunlight we need. We don't eat the food that we need. We don't rest enough as we need. We don't have community as we need. So all of these things impact the gut because the gut is the second brain.
It is.
And so of course it's going to be impacted. And so clients will come in with bloating, constipation, allergies, intolerances, reflux, any digestive complaint, and that's what will bring them in. And so then you turn the corner and you start talking about sunlight and sleep. They're like, oh, why am I here? It's just for my gut.
I came from my diarrhea. I came from my constipation.
I'm going to fix my diarrhea. I'm like, yes.
And so there's so many factors, right? One of the things that I talk about a lot with my patients, I know you do as well, is chronic stress. How do you see chronic stress manifest in gut issues?
So chronic stress also, I think perception of it is important. So I like to explain to my clients about resiliency and how we see, like, we are meant to be stressed. Stress is good for us in a certain level, right? And so I think it's always nice to know that that is understood. So we don't actually have a perception that all stress is bad. But overactivation and constantly in overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system and not bringing ourselves back into parasympathetic enough impacts the signaling, impacts digestive movement, impacts digestion and breakdown, impacts our cofactors. It pulls on resources and demands of our body. So we can't actually have intrinsic factor, enough gastric acid, enough, all these components that we need. It creates inflammation, because we have huge amounts of cortisol and glucose and breakdown of tissue. Right. And so we get impermeability of our gut microbiome. We also have your bacteria more than our cells, incredibly.
Yes, I always vastly outnumbered. Yes,
blown away by that. Yeah. We're not even feeding them properly because we can't break our food down properly if we're in a stress state. We're running from a tiger. We don't have energy to put it into our belly.
I tell people all the time in very similar terms, it's like if you're always in fight or flight, you never have time to rest, digest, and detoxify. That's what happens with our parasympathetic activation. So when we eat, our body tries to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. But if you're eating on the run, you're eating in your car, you're eating with your kids and like they're getting out the door, or you're eating at work while you're doing work, or scrolling on your phone, looking at your Instagram feed while you're eating. I'm not guilty of this ever, I promise. I'm guilty of many of these things, personally. And I know from my own perspective, if I take the time and I eat my food, and I intentionally eat my food. I was talking to a colleague a little while ago about, she had a patient with tons of food allergies and tried to restrict all these things that wasn't working. And all she had to do was tell her to eat her food intentionally, and all her food allergies went away, like even on her panel, which was crazy, right? And that's because we're activating that parasympathetic nervous system, right? And there's other major reasons why we get issues with our gut. I mean, one of the big ones is antibiotics, right? I mean, we're seeing this all the time.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We think about antibiotics, right? But what else do we think about? So, what else creates a reduction in bacteria? All the preservatives, all the chemicals.
Yes.
Alcohol. We don't even think about that. So there's so many components that we don't even think about that actually reduce. So many people are doing parasite cleansers these days.
I know. It's one of those trends that tries to make me cry. Tries to.
Me too.
Yeah.
Someone walks in and I'm like, no, not again. Don't tell me this. So, overuse of berberine, overuse of any antibacterial herb, toothpaste, mouthwash. We know it all starts in our mouth. There's so many components that we actually consume that we don't know. And back to the perception of food, I get that a lot with clients as well, is that a lot of them have issues with or have orthorexia around food, over consciousness about healthy foods.
Right. Afraid to eat anything bad.
Yeah. So they eat something that grandma gave them and they're stressed. They're telling their body that it's bad and then they have a reaction. Whereas, I train and teach clients to then look at it as a gift.
Yes.
It's an energy transfer. It was made with love. Put the love in. They don't react. It's absolutely incredible.
It's amazing that just the psychology of it. And we know that the placebo effect is super strong. Mm-hmm. You have a very difficult time in depression trials, for example, because you have 30 or 40% people respond to the placebo.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that the psychology of it is very, very big. And working on that is huge when we're working with patients. And one thing about antibiotics that I like to remind people is that so many kids now are subject to antibiotics so early. And as a result of that, it's like a nuclear bomb every single time they take them. And it's really difficult for that gut diversity to bounce back. And sometimes what can happen is it rebounds in pathogenic types of ways or in dysbiotic sort of ways. These kids get asthma, allergies, neurologic issues, and depression. I mean, I remember one kid that I saw not that long ago, when he turned from, a kid to puberty, everything shifted. And it was gut microbiome related and methylation issues with his B vitamins. And we got that taken care of. And he was like 100% back to where he was before. And so I think that we misrepresent a lot of mental illness now as something that's going on in the brain.
Yeah.
But we know, I mean, from personal experience, I'm sure you've seen this, if you optimize the gut, these things can go away.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I also say similar things in children. And I had a client, born C-section, eczema by 2, asthma, allergies and psoriasis, and then anxiety. That is probably like 3 or 4 clients per week of mine follow that trajectory, and sometimes even into adulthood. And so when you look at that, and then obviously there is so many drivers associated with the gut microbiome, the most incredible part of this is that it's a signaling molecule. The signaling molecules, the postbiotics, the things that are actually traveling through the vagal nerve, through into the brain, and we're actually communicating the stress responses or the threat systems, and that's the allergies, that's the intolerances that the body is communicating all the time. So if you can calm that and heal that and soothe that and support that, and we have so many ways to do that in clinical practice.
Yeah. Let's talk about common denominator with the gut, which is gut inflammation. And if the gut's inflamed, you can have this ecosystem where you have what's called a leaky gut. Let's talk a little bit about that, how you think about leaky gut, and then how that kind of corresponds to some of this.
I see from a threat base again. I think it's a really nice sort of an analogy or a representation of if the body is assuming that things are coming through and it's the main protection area, it's the hole all the way through.
Yes, top to bottom.
Top to bottom.
Yeah.
So it has to have really good protective support or defenses.
It does, yeah.
So,
well, 80% of your immune system is in your gut, right? So it's a huge amount of protection, supposedly. Yeah.
So if it feels or sees something to be a threat, and what amazes me is that if we consume, say, a banana, and at the same time we have an accident or someone is screaming at us or we've had some form of trauma, that banana can actually be what the body thought was the trauma.
Yeah.
And that amazes me. So every time we now eat that banana, the body reacts to that in an inflammatory way and then continues to degrade the areas of the gut. And we have a breakdown. We have leaky gut. And so there's other foods that we know, wheat is a common one that will increase zonulin levels, and we can see that to be increasing the gaps or increasing the leaky gut.
Right. So the gaps between the cells that line the gut, one of the proteins that is responsible for those connections is called zonulin. Right.
And so it increases.
Right. And you see that increased level, it could be corresponding to potentially having breakdown of that gut lining and allowing things in the body. Because, like you said, the tube, mouth to anus, is really the outside world. And what our body's trying to do is prevent anything from that outside world to come in that shouldn't get in here. But what happens when you have those breakdown of those junctions and things come in, we get this antigen-antibody response in the body, which just means that you have this complex of inflammation that starts happening. And then not only do you get a leaky gut, but you also get a leaky brain here too.
Yeah. And then what makes it worse is now the gaps are there. And then guess what? The bacteria's, it's dysbiosis. And then guess what? They produce LPSs, which are toxic. So we have endotoxemia and then into the brain, into the bloodstream. It's scary.
Yeah. And so when people come in with, with depression or brain fog, if you just work on the brain itself, you may not see the benefit of actually doing the foundational work. And this is where I want to get to the science of it. So you and I have a similar framework when thinking about the gut microbiome. What is your framework here that when somebody's coming in, how do you think about testing the microbiome? What are you doing? And then we can kind of go into some of the science there.
So first of all, I think microbiome mapping or GIFX is like testing parameters.
Yeah.
But I also test for intolerances and IgG testing. So I think food sensitivity, food intolerance testing is important because compliance of clients is tricky.
Yeah,
So if you say elimination diet, people are going to be like, no thanks. And so if you have a set parameter of what they need to be removing so for a certain period of time, it's so much easier for them to be compliant.
And feel for the fire, right? Sometimes you don't know if this food sensitivities are related to gut inflammation that's already there or if the foods are actually causing inflammation. So I do the same thing, although, I don't always take it as gospel. I try to give it as a landmark for people saying, for now, let's take these foods out while we heal your gut. That's how I think about it.
And the way I think about it is it's reducing that low-grade chronic inflammation. So it's giving the capacity in the body's potential to heal. Yeah. So you get a lot from those two tests. Obviously, if you're doing clinical metabolomics as well, you're doing oats tests so you can actually see what nutrients need to be put in. If you're doing amino acid testing, you know then what you're actually using to rebuild those areas. And then from the microbiome mapping, you know what you're dealing with pretty well. You have a good understanding of parasites, overgrowths, infestations, yeast infestations. You're looking at, what keystones are there, what keystones are missing, what short-chain fatty acids. You can tell a lot from someone's diet, what they eat.
Yes.
That freaks them out a little bit. So,
it can.
how did you know?
Yes.
So, butyrate, none of these other ones that are really like fuel that we need and to be in really good levels. So you can use a lot of these little tools and tricks and they're levers that we pull.
Yeah, I think one good correlation here for people that's very important is that we make a lot of our neurotransmitters in our gut. And so if we don't have working or optimized gut microbiota, you may not have enough neurotransmitters to actually be made. Things like serotonin, 90% of our serotonin is made in our gut.
And you notice this after antibiotics, right? Mood disorders hugely increased after it. And that's one thing that blew me away that I kept noticing over and over again in my clients. Why do I feel so low, Jodi? I've just had courses and courses of antibiotics and clients who have chronic skin conditions, they're on antibiotics for 6 months, low grade.
It's crazy. I know. And I was also recently talking to a patient of mine who had antibiotics as well and had the same kind of thing. And we did some testing afterwards, and there's two different commensals, like normal bacteria in our gut called Lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, which actually signal the GABA system in the brain. And so it's not directly giving GABA to the brain, but it goes via the vagal nerve up to the brain and gives you that GABA signaling. And they were gone in this patient. Those are the most prominent commensals that we have.
Yeah.
And as soon as we start rebuilding her Lactobacillus bifidobacterium, symptoms went away. It's pretty simple. So we have to remember that the gut-brain connection is the gut microbiota brain connection. It goes both ways, right? And so what happens, I've seen, you have a leaky gut and you have a leaky brain too. And so it's a really good corresponding if you see a leaky gut and somebody's having brain fog or concentration or depression or whatever, but they're also having a leaky brain as well. When it comes down to this gut-brain axis and thinking about it, I know you talked a little bit about the vagal nerve before. Let's talk a little more about it. What is the vagus nerve? Why is it so important? And why it's so important for digestion specifically?
Yeah. So I like to refer to it as the wandering nerve.
It is.
It wanders.
It does.
Yeah. It's a central regulator and it's signaler and it helps support that regulation. And I think about it in a tone sense as well, where you are regulating your nervous system. So many things will impact it in that way. So if you have, and I explain it to clients, like if there is a disconnect here, your body can't communicate to the gut. Or your brain can't communicate to the gut because you are sitting like this all day, you're not breathing properly, you're scrunching over, you don't have any, room and digestive capacity. You're not humming, you're not creating that perfect tone, you're getting restriction in those areas. Even nutrients is a huge component for, nerve regeneration and health and support in that way as well. So what I think about it as is that key communicator channel, it's the highway, and most people are cut.
They forget that their body is connected to their brain kind of thing. Yes.
Yeah.
This happened to me for many years of my life too. So I can sympathize.
Yeah. So again, you're looking at the gut itself for support and to be looking at healing the vagal nerve, but also itself. There's so many strategies that you can be using for the vagal nerve, and looking at, just even simple like cold therapy on the neck.
Yeah.
You know?
We have the reflex there.
Singing, breathing, proper breathing practices. My children know about the vagal nerve a lot. And so they do get sore tummies when they're anxious, and I explain that their brain is here, and that's why you're anxious and you have a a sore tummy. And so you breathe and you create that connection. And so if you're breathing here and you're breathing in your belly, then you're opening up and allowing space for the vagal to just communicate, and everything calms down and settles down. So no one's upset anymore.
Yeah, the vagal nerve is really cool because it is that wandering nerve, and it's all built on the parasympathetic activation aspect of it. So when you have better vagal tone, you have better parasympathetic tone.
Yes.
And the problem with modern life is that most of us do not live in that parasympathetic world enough to allow ourselves to rest, digest, detoxify, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, there's a lot of different strategies for you, but I like to remind people that are listening that vagal tone is so important. And so for example, if you come and see Jodi and I in practice, we start trying to optimize your gut microbiota, but your vagal nerve tone isn't very good. There's nothing you're going to be able to do. I mean, you've probably seen this in practice a lot, where you give, at least I have in the past, where you think you're giving a good probiotic regimen. We'll talk about some interventions in a minute, but nothing changes.
And that's where, you can throw everything at the wall, but if you actually don't do the basics, and if you don't have the foundations, and if you're not living by the laws of what it means to be human.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah. Then you can't get anywhere.
Yeah. And I know people just want that one thing.
The fix.
The one thing that's going to fix them. Like, I had a family member of mine just reach out to me. She's like, well, what probiotic can I take to fix my belly aches and my migraines? I'm like, I can't answer that question.
Breathing.
Yes. There's many things, of course, right? Yeah. But it's the basic laws of being human, like you said. Yeah. I like that term. That's good. But what I found over the years is that if somebody comes in and we don't address that sympathetic overdrive, no matter what we try, and if you're constantly living in a place where you're always looking for the next answer, you're not giving yourself the time to rest, digest, relax, you're going to have a really difficult time healing.
And it can be scary for a lot of clients. And this is what I find is that as soon as they start to get into more of a parasympathetic, things arise. And it can be scary. It can be emotional. And so they run again. And it's just this cycle of starting to relax. Oh, it's too scary. Quick run, and straight back into sympathetic.
Yeah.
And so it's that balance between, we want a bit of sympathetic, but we also want to know that we can drop into parasympathetic.
Of course. Yeah.
And that's where these techniques, I guess, and taking it, in time to actually get there and practice being in those spaces.
Yeah.
Just chronic. I have so many chronically ill clients that are in exactly the same space. And it's just all up here, can't relax. They're mostly lawyers or students, and they're telling me I'll say, have you ever sat down and tried to breathe and just be still? No, I can't. It's too scary.
It's so interesting how that happens. You get this sort of reflexive anxiety when your parasympathetic system goes online when you're not used to it.
Yeah. Yep.
What are some of the ways that you kind of help people experience that parasympathetic, just to give them a feeling of what it's supposed to feel like? What do you typically do for that?
Yeah. So I think an expectation I set for them is it's important to not be wanting to be perfect at this. So that's my first one, because a lot of them will sit there and have a perception of meditation to be completely still and mind clear. Yeah. And that's never going to happen.
No. As soon as you start meditating, your mind goes about 1,000,000 miles an hour for the first 5 or 10 minutes.
10 minutes, right? And then by 20 minutes, you're like, oh, this is nice.
Yeah.
I can do this.
Yeah.
So it's setting up expectations for me, for them. And then it's making them, getting them addicted to feeling like they do when they are still. And it is really easy once you get there. But it's about setting the time and having the willpower to actually sit. So I give an analogy. I sit there in my chair. I'm like, you will sit in your chair for 10 minutes and time it. And because you'll have a timer that goes off, and you will lock yourself there. You won't, no to-do lists, no writing things down. You will sit yourself in that chair and just sit. Don't care about the brain. Just wash it over like clouds. I always use your analogy. Just let them fly over like
it's a beautiful
clouds.
one. Yeah.
So, and then them just building that practice up. I think it's the most powerful thing. Yeah. And it's teaching them that they actually have to do something versus I'm going to give them something.
Yeah. Listening to your mind is so intriguing because we all have these same sort of habitual patterns. And I know what my habitual patterns are. As soon as I start meditating, it's going to go run off my to-do list that I haven't done in the last 3 days, or that I have to do for the next 3 days that I must do right now. It's so interesting how your mind wants so much you to grab on all of these thoughts, right? And like we have 70,000 thoughts on average every day. And that's a lot of thoughts, right? So don't believe everything you think, please.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing. But if you're anxious, you're stressed, you're depressed, it goes up to like 120,000 thoughts per day. So please don't believe everything you think. And it gives you more of a sense and perspective of that the mind is not really there to optimize your health.
No.
The mind is there to protect you and keep you safe from danger, to help you procreate so you have babies and you further on the human life forms as it is. Right? So it's not serving us oftentimes. We have to train our brain to serve us.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this beautiful book, Warrior, and it's about the amygdala, and it's for children. And it talks about that it's like this little almond shape that walks around behind the little boy and says, I'm here to look after you. And so it talks children through the process of why you need to be protected and why sometimes there is an overactivation of what you need to be protected is. And so it's a good analogy. It's like, we are primal beings that need to be protected in an environment that's actually really scary. There is a lot out to get us.
Sure.
But we need to then, train the brain to know that these are the circumstances that we do need to be worried about, and these are the circumstances that we don't need to be worried about.
Right.
And it's just an evolutionary process.
Right, because we're not built evolutionarily to live a long time. We're built evolutionarily to live until tomorrow or maybe a week from now. But 6 months, a year, most of us can't think that far off. I mean, things are shifting. Now you have more people that are involved and interested in longevity and performance and health optimization, which is great. But it's not an easy conversation for most people, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck. You have kids to take care of and you have stresses at work. And like, I totally understand. But this is a big topic. I also wanted to make sure that we addressed a little bit on like the tools and interventions that we use in clinical practice to help optimize the gut. Like, what are your kind of foundational principles here?
So I guess, like looking at what's irritating the gut. And so, we've talked about obviously the nervous system, foods, anything that you're consuming that maybe you shouldn't, like cleaning up the diet is probably the most important things. Mums actually sit on the toilet. Like, it helps.
So what is the alternative for sitting on the toilet?
I find that mums are like, I'm really constipated. I'm like, okay, so when was the last time you actually sat on the toilet?
Oh, interesting.
And took time to go to the toilet? They're like, I just thought I would feel it and then it would come. But because mums are so busy, they don't even have time to do a poo.
I thought you meant they may be squatting or like...
Oh, yeah, positioning is important too, yeah.
Well, that's
like actually getting on the toilet, that's the first step.
That's fun. Okay. I wouldn't have thought about that step. I like that. I'll have to remember that.
But positioning on the toilet is important. Like if you've got a footstool and things like that. So, like we're talking about these very basic, but I always start at the basics because if you don't have the basics, then you're still not going to be able to do it if we give the probiotics, Yeah,
that's a big one. I think we've been talking about this most of the episode, which is that you have to build the system, the laws of the human, as you said, so that everything else is going to work better. But we also know that perfection is the enemy of doing anything sometimes, right? And so for what we need to do as clinicians and work with people, we have to kind of bring them along a journey, right?
And we need a bridge. We need to create a bridge.
Right. And so what are some of those bridges, like from a direct intervention perspective, that you might do for your patients?
So, so water, hydration, minerals. I love talking about minerals. A key thing for proper hydration, peristaltic movement, gut microbiome, probiotics. If we know what they need, that is good. Many clients I have come to me with their testing, low bifido, low lacto, like most. It's incredible how low all the keystone species are in clients. So you can rebuild those. I love using spores. They are a frequent of my practice. And I love using amino acids, especially glutamine. Right?
Yeah, the primary fuel of the small intestine.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is that. There's other tools and tricks. I like pH-DG in certain circumstances. I love using immunoglobulins. I love using polyphenols. There's combinations that I will use, calcium glucarate. There's inositol. There's so many useful compounds that we can have, but they have to be personalized to that client.
Yeah. How do you think about fiber?
And fiber, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the prompt. That goes without saying. That's my laws of being a human.
Laws of being human. Got it.
30 grams of fiber per day. Berries and dark chocolate. We cover those bases real quick.
Yeah. I do have some concerns sometimes when I'm working with people with giving them too much fiber. Do you have a concern about that too?
Yeah, especially, and this is this build, right? So if I go from no fiber to fiber, why am I so bloated and gassy?
Yes.
And it's painful, delaying
You have to slowly increase their amount over time, right?
Exactly.
And you don't start off at 30 grams a day. You can increase them slowly over time. And that seems like the best way, typically.
Yeah, and it's just teaching clients about soluble, insoluble, which ones to go for,
Right.
how to include it in the diet easily, getting different types of fibers and foods and rainbows.
Right.
I use very simple analogies.
Jodi, I can't believe how many people I've seen over the years with chronic issues that have never had gut testing done.
Yeah.
And I think it's because patients don't like to do it, but doctors don't like to prescribe it or to ask for people to do it because they know that patients don't want to crap in a French fry container. And if we could get past that, I've just been amazed at how many people I've seen over the years that have never had that testing done.
Yeah.
And in the sort of the foundational things that we do, gut testing, metabolomic testing, food sensitivity testing at Health Optimization Medicine and Practice or another profit, that's the foundation there. And when you can build that, if you're missing the gut, it's a big piece to miss. And I feel like so many people are going out there and just not getting this kind of testing done.
No.
But doing it in a framework that gives you a sense of what's going on. You mentioned a lot of things. One thing I want to mention also is maldigestion. So if you don't have enough gastric acid, if you don't have enough pancreatic or enzymes, if your gallbladder's not making enough fat.
Or not chewing properly.
Or not chewing, of course, right? Of course, it always starts with your mouth, right? That's also going to significantly affect what's getting down into your small intestine, what's getting down into your large intestine. And so maldigestion is a big one, especially if you're stressed all the time.
Yeah.
As you get older, you make less gastric acid. So these are things that I look at as well. And I think from a framework perspective, we're doing the interventions that you mentioned by looking at testing, because if you look at the testing, then you can see, okay, these are the levers that I can pull.
You got parameters,
that really can start making a difference. And doing it slowly, typically. I mean, and for me, I would say that it takes me at least 3 months, but sometimes even years to optimize somebody's gut.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a client at the moment. I've seen him for a year and a half, and he's a psychiatrist. And now he sends every single client to me for microbiome testing because he saw how it impacted him. And so timeline, it's so variable because the body will change. And this is what I always preface in my clients, because they will come back and say, oh, I've had a Herx reaction. Well, I've had a reaction. I'm like, that's Herx, that's fine. Or we'll moderate it or we'll change it. So it's that contact that we actually need with clients in the first few months. And 6 months, I would probably normally give it.
Yeah, I think that's average for me. And I always say that, I see it so often that things look worse before they get better.
Absolutely.
Too. Yeah. And the trick there is that once you heal up the gut, then everything is just grown in the gut. And so all of a sudden you heal the gut up, so the gut lining is better, but now all that bacteria, fungus, and whatever else is hanging out there. You can see it now. So oh, great. Now you actually know what to address, but it can look worse before it can get better too.
Absolutely. And I think it's setting expectations is the important part with clients. Yeah.
So, obviously we have a company called Troscriptions, and we make a lot of products here that are kind of understanding that the processes to heal from a gut perspective require foundational kinds of things. And one of the main ones is going to be your stress response, right? So we have a product called Trocalm. And Trocalm is great because it downregulates that nervous system from that sympathetic activation to parasympathetic without making you feel tired. It has kava, CBD, CBG, something called nicotinol GABA, vitamin B3 GABA. So that gets across the blood-brain barrier easily. And you get a little bit of B3, a little bit of GABA, so you get this sort of mild activation with the calm. And so I find this is great for my patients. Actually, we were talking about earlier as a way to have your patients experience what it feels like to feel calm, because a lot of them are living in this sympathetic activation all the time. And so if you can give them that experience of where they're trying to be, then they're like, oh, when I meditate and I felt this way, just like I felt with Trocalm, that's where I'm supposed to be.
That's the aim.
Yeah, so I love Trocalm for that reason. And I also use a lot of our Troz as well, which is for sleep, because again, if you don't have good sleep, your nervous system is not going to regulate well. You're not going to digest your food well. Your insulin levels are going to be higher, and et cetera, et cetera. You're going to die earlier, right? So the average...
Your HRV.
Oh, terrible, yeah. I think the average amount, at least in the United States, I don't know about Australia, maybe I think the average amount of sleep that an adult gets is about 6.5 hours.
Yeah, I would say that that's close.
Yeah. So that's not enough for most people. Most people need at least 7 to 8 hours. You're not in the exception to the rule, I promise you, unless you're like 2% of the population. Yeah. My father's actually in that exception, but I didn't get that genetic makeup, unfortunately. My brother did, but I didn't. So you're using something like Trozy, which is a comprehensive sleep support, the GABA system, serotonin, melatonin. Yeah. Also working on adenosine system too, with cordyceps and adenosine directly. Transformative for my patients, again, because you reset them. You get them on a better pattern of sleep. Then you can talk about sleep routines and sleep cycles and don't sleep in the same room as your snoring partner or whatever it might be. But initially, it's just getting them the sleep that they need.
I use it as the bridge analogy. I'm like, this is the bridge that you're going to need to get there. And then you don't need to be building the bridge anymore because you've already set the habits. Yeah. And Tro Calm I use for alcohol, with that use of needing to relax in the afternoon, because I have quite a lot of very busy clients, as all of us do, and to show them what it feels like to relax without the alcohol, that's important.
Yeah, it's a big one, right? So that down regulation of the nervous system without going to a glass of wine or a bottle or whatever.
Yeah, so mums, dads, I find that that's a very easy way to show them how to have a different habit.
Yeah. So balancing that nervous system is really important. I also use something from our arsenal called Tromune as well, because Tromune is a fantastic anti-inflammatory. It increases deep sleep. It's also an antioxidant. And there's some actual studies that show it has a beneficial effect on the gut microbiota ecosystem as well, and helping work on optimizing commensals, the normal types of bacteria. Yeah. So I use that a lot for people with chronic inflammation as a support. And you give it at night, it also helps with deep sleep.
Yeah, I love cordyceps.
Yeah.
Cordyceps is even more powerful.
Yeah, so cordyceps is the main active ingredient in Tromune. It's the most powerful active from the cordyceps mushroom. Cordyceps has been around for thousands of years as a medicinal mushroom in China. And now we have cordycepin, which has been studied now in things like autoimmune issues, allergies, asthma, even in cancer, metabolic syndrome. So very interesting things. So it's a great immune support. So a very special guest in the studio, Miss Jodi Duval. Jodi, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Don't forget to like and subscribe below so you never miss an episode. Comments, we read them all. And we'll see you next time on Don't Look Up.